I sat cross-legged on the edge of the antique shed in my parents' Greenwich home. The white silk of my wedding dress draped across the floor beside me. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the room, but I barely noticed. My fingers fidgeted with the thin silver chain around my neck as excitement and nerves tangled together, a familiar knot I had carried for weeks. Today was meant to be perfect. Every detail, every smile, every step down the aisle carefully imagined. The smell of fresh lilies in the hallway, the faint hum of traffic outside. Even the distant church bells felt like they were part of a dream I was about to step into. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking of Nate, his confident grin. The way he always made me feel like the only person in the room. Our 4 years together had felt like a promise written in stone. Then my phone buzzed. Ila's name flashed across the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. She was Vivian's bridesmaid, my friend. The one person I thought I could trust implicitly. I answered, and a brief text appeared before I could even say hello. Tessa, you need to know. Vivian and Nate, they're planning something. Don't ignore this. I froze. The lilies suddenly smelled faintly sour. My stomach dropped, nausea curling around my ribs. This couldn't be real. Vivian and Nate together. The words didn't make sense. And yet, the tremor in my hands said otherwise. I sank onto the shed, my dress slipping further across the floor, my mind racing through every interaction I had ignored, every sly glance I had dismissed. I drew in a shaky breath and tried to steady myself, knowing that before the church doors opened, I needed to decide how to face the storm that was quietly settling over my perfect morning. The next text from Ila would change everything, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I pressed play on Ila's voice note, my thumb trembling against the glass of my phone. Her calm, deliberate tone filled the quiet room, each word cutting sharper than I expected. Tessa, I'm so sorry you're hearing this way. But Nate, he's planning to leave you after the wedding. He's been seeing Vivian, and they're using your trust fund to cover their plans. You deserve to know before it's too late. The words sank like lead, dragging memories and doubts to the surface. I remembered last month when Nate forgot our anniversary. The way he laughed at something Vivian said during dinner, brushing off my questions. I had convinced myself it was nothing, just sibling banter, playful teasing. Now those moments felt like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see. My fingers tightened around the phone. Shock made my chest ache, heartbreak tangled with disbelief, leaving a hollow, bitter space inside me. I ran through every encounter I had shared with them, every text, every glance, every unspoken joke, and suddenly it all felt tainted. How had I missed it? How could someone I trusted, someone I thought loved me, betray me so completely? Anger followed quickly, hot and fierce. I stood abruptly, pacing the room, gripping the edge of the shed for balance, my mind racing. I pictured Nate's smug smile, Vivian's confident eyes, and the thought of them together in secret made my stomach twist. I was angry at them, at myself for trusting, at the cruel timing of this revelation. The voice note ended, leaving a ringing silence that felt heavier than any words. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Decisions had to be made. Plans had to shift, and I had no time to waste. Every second that passed brought the wedding closer, and with it, the moment when truth and deceit would collide. I set the phone down, breath shaky, realizing that before the ceremony, I would need a plan sharp enough to confront both of them. I dialed Vivian's number, my fingers stiff, heart hammering as I waited for her to pick up. When she answered, her voice was light, playful even, as if nothing in the world could touch her. Tessa, finally getting ready? I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Vivian, we need to talk now. My tone was sharper than I intended, but there was no room for politeness. There was a pause, then laughter, small and dismissive. Tessa, what are you talking about? You're nervous. That's all. I don't know what you're imagining. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, letting my anger rise. Nate, the trust fund. Ila warned me. I know everything. Her laugh turned brittle, a tremor undercutting the confidence she always wore. You're overreacting. This is ridiculous. I would never. She trailed off, caught between denial and the flicker of guilt in her eyes. I clenched my jaw. There was no reasoning with her. No subtle confrontation to untangle this betrayal. My mind shifted to a plan I had been hesitating to consider, one bold enough to expose both of them in front of everyone. I had been imagining it for minutes, but now it became real. The altar swap. I would take Vivian's place in the dress, step into the ceremony, and let truth unravel in front of all the guests. I called Ela immediately. Her voice was steady, but tinged with surprise. "You want me to help record everything exactly?" I said. "We don't have another option. We have to make them see the consequences before anyone else gets hurt." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then whispered, "I'm in." Every moment. I hung up and looked at the dress on the shed, my resolve solidifying. The plan was set. The next hour passed in a blur of whispered instructions and calculated movements. I traced the seams of my dress one last time, making sure it would fit seamlessly on Vivian when the moment came, while mentally rehearsing how I would step into her shoes literally and figuratively without anyone noticing. Ela and I went over every detail: the timing of the music, the position of the bridesmaids, the exact moment the veil would lift, and when I would make my entrance. Guests began arriving, laughter and chatter spilling through the church doors. Each cheerful face outside the veil of my strategy made my chest tighten, the normality of it all clashing with the storm I was about to unleash. I could hear the faint rustle of programs and the clinking of glasses in the reception hall, and I felt the weight of every second ticking closer to the ceremony. Ela hovered nearby, her phone in hand, recording angles, timing cues, and the tiniest details. For a moment, I caught a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She swallowed hard, glanced toward the main entrance, then back at me. "Are you sure we should do this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I gave her a sharp nod, meeting her gaze with a calm certainty I didn't entirely feel. "We have to," I said. "They've planned this for months. If we don't act, it'll be too late. Stick with me. Every step." She exhaled slowly, a brief tremor in her shoulders, and nodded. That single moment of doubt tightened the coil of tension in my chest, reminding me how precarious everything was. The sun was climbing higher, and the church doors opened for the first wave of guests. Every detail was in place, every risk calculated. Ela's grip on the phone tightened, and I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the moment when deception and truth would collide. As the music began to swell, I prepared to move toward the altar, and the plan would finally unfold. I sank lower into the shadowed corner of the back pew, the heavy veil over my face acting as a shield. From here, I could see everything. The steady shuffle of guests, the delicate arrangements of lilies lining the aisle, the pastel programs clutched nervously in hands that had no idea what was about to unfold. Every smile and whispered greeting outside my hiding place made my pulse spike. The tension thrummed like a low drum beat through the church. Then Vivian appeared at the entrance, gliding forward in my dress. The fabric hugged her frame, a perfect imitation of the gown I had chosen for myself months ago. Her posture was poised, practiced, though I could see the slight stiffness in her shoulders. Every careful step, every measured glance was intended to command attention, and it worked. Guests leaned forward in anticipation, unaware of the secret they were witnessing. Nate stood at the altar, perfectly composed, his jaw tight and eyes scanning the crowd with a confident grin. He thought everything was proceeding according to his plan. I could almost see the calculation behind that smile, the smug satisfaction that he believed he had engineered the perfect deception. He had no idea that the person he was expecting to walk down the aisle, the naive bride he thought he could manipulate, was not the one he would confront. The bridesmaids flanked Vivian, unaware that their careful choreography was now part of a trap. Ela's phone remained discreetly angled, recording every footstep, every gasp from the audience that had yet to notice the truth simmering beneath the surface. I could feel the adrenaline tightening in my chest, coiling like a spring as I waited for the exact moment to intervene. With every step Vivian took, the tension mounted. Every quiet breath I drew reminded me how close we were to the turning point. The instant when the carefully constructed illusion would shatter, the moment was nearly here, and I knew that as the veil lifted, the truth would strike like a hammer. The music swelled as Vivian reached the altar, her hand trembling slightly around the bouquet I had chosen for myself. Guests leaned forward, smiles bright and oblivious, while Nate's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, certain that his scheme had succeeded. I held my breath, waiting for the exact moment, my fingers tightening around the edge of my veil. Then I rose slowly, deliberately, stepping from the shadows of the back pew into the aisle. Gasps rippled through the congregation as heads turned and a hush fell over the room. I could see the flicker of confusion in Nate's eyes, the sudden shift in Vivian's confident smile as she realized I was here, fully aware of every detail of their betrayal. Ila's phone stayed steady, recording the entire scene. I pressed play on the voice note, letting Nate's own words echo through the historic church. After the wedding, I'm done with Tessa. Vivian and we have plans. The trust fund, the apartment. It's all hers with me. She won't suspect a thing. The room went still. Whispers rose into murmurs. Cameras tilted. Phones lifted. Nate's confident posture faltered, and his jaw tightened as he searched my face for any sign of jest. Vivian's lips parted, eyes wide with panic, the carefully constructed mask of composure cracking under the weight of exposure. I didn't speak. I let the recording do the talking. Each word from Nate, each laugh that had once seemed private, now bounced off the vaulted ceilings and landed on everyone present. My parents' faces shifted from confusion to shock while friends and relatives stared, processing the betrayal with every second that passed. I moved a step closer, holding the phone like a weapon, letting every eye in the room take in my calm, deliberate composure. Nate opened his mouth, tried to speak, but the words faltered and died on his tongue. Vivian's hand gripped his arm, seeking reassurance that no longer existed. I could feel the tension vibrate through the aisle, the power of truth finally resting in my hands. The world was watching, and for the first time, I held control entirely. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears as I prepared for the next move, knowing that what came after this would define everything. The whispers had grown into a low, tense hum, filling the church with a weight I could almost touch. Phones tilted toward Nate and Vivian, cameras flashing discreetly, and friends leaning toward one another, mouths moving in silent speculation. My parents' eyes were wide, voices caught somewhere between disbelief and outrage, and I felt the electric charge of the room settle around me. Nate tried to recover first. He stepped forward, hands raised in a half plea, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everyone listen. There's been a misunderstanding, he said, voice tight, measured, but the audience had already seen the truth. The murmur of conversations grew louder as people checked phones, replayed clips, whispered confirmations to each other. He faltered with every step, unable to reclaim the confidence he had relied on for months. Vivian clutched his arm, her face pale, voice trembling. Tessa, this isn't fair. You can't just, she stopped, realization dawning too late. As every eye turned toward her in judgment, I stood still, calm and authoritative, letting the weight of the truth press down on them without a word from me. My breathing was steady, deliberate, and I watched their faces crumble, each shift and twitch revealing the cracks in the facade they had so carefully maintained. Ila's recording captured every movement, every flinch, every desperate glance, preserving it for the world outside these walls. Guests whispered, some chuckling, some shaking their heads, while others leaned closer, capturing evidence on their own phones. Nate's hands twitched as he tried again to appeal to the crowd, attempting to explain, to charm, to manipulate. But every attempt failed. Each explanation only drew sharper looks, skeptical eyes, and more whispers. The tension in the room settled into something heavier, inescapable. Nate and Vivian had no foothold left. The illusion of control had slipped entirely from their grasp. I let the moment stretch, watching, waiting. The plan was in motion, the consequences unfolding exactly as I had calculated, and every reaction confirmed the power of truth in my hands. The ceremony was far from over, and the next steps would push the chaos to its peak. By the time we left the church, the recording had already started circulating. Guests uploaded snippets, whispers turned into notifications, and every phone in the room seemed to carry a fragment of Nate and Vivian's betrayal. I watched from a distance as the first wave of comments rolled in. My phone buzzed with alerts. The words on the screen were sharp and immediate: shock, disbelief, outrage, and amusement all mixed together. Nate's restaurants, his social media persona, and Vivian's carefully curated image began to fracture before my eyes. Every post that mentioned the wedding, every clip of the moment the veil lifted, chipped away at the empire of deceit they had built. I scrolled through hundreds of comments, the world reacting to the truth I had unleashed, and a quiet satisfaction settled over me, not vindictive, but firm and justified. Hila stayed at my side, her presence steady, eyes fixed on the screen as she monitored the spread. "They're panicking," she murmured, voice low. I nodded, letting the words sink in. It was more than revenge. It was accountability, exposure that demanded they face what they had done. As the day wore on, messages from friends, distant family, and even strangers poured in. People were dissecting the video, debating every gesture, every word. Nate's attempts to charm or explain himself online were met with ridicule, skepticism, and the undeniable truth of his betrayal. Vivian's network of colleagues and acquaintances began to murmur, some distancing themselves, others commenting on her audacity. Sitting back, I allowed myself to reflect. Justice and revenge are often confused. But this was different. It wasn't cruelty or pettiness. It was the exposure of truth, the reclaiming of control over my own story. Every notification, every repost reminded me that the power of integrity outweighs deceit. By evening, the viral momentum had grown unstoppable. My chest felt lighter, my mind sharper, and the realization that I had taken command of the narrative began to crystallize. The storm they had created for me had now turned entirely in my favor, and the next chapter of confrontation would take place on both personal and public stages. The following evening, my parents insisted on a family gathering at our house, claiming it was time to sort everything out like adults. Vivian and Nate arrived together, faces carefully composed, as if rehearsed apologies could erase months of deceit. I sat at the head of the table, my posture deliberate, eyes steady, letting the tension settle over the room. Vivian spoke first, her voice tight but measured. "Tessa, this wasn't supposed to happen. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. We made mistakes." "Yes, but," I raised a hand, cutting her off before she could weave excuses. "Mistakes? You call planning to steal my fiancé and exploit my trust fund a mistake?" The words landed like steel, echoing in the silent room. Nate tried to intervene, his tone conciliatory, rehearsed. "Tessa, you have to understand, it wasn't like you think. There are circumstances, pressures." I shook my head. Circumstances don't justify betrayal. And no amount of charm will cover up months of lies. Today, nothing you say changes the truth. Your actions speak louder than your words, and they've already spoken to everyone who mattered. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, caught between family loyalty and the undeniable reality. Friends who had witnessed the viral fallout from the wedding lingered just outside the conversation, Hila included, her presence a quiet reinforcement of the evidence and my authority. I could see her subtle nods, a silent agreement that the truth I presented was final and irrefutable. Vivian's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her composure cracking, while Nate's jaw tightened, futile words dying on his lips. I remained calm, firm, and deliberate. Every sentence a boundary drawn, every glance a reminder that I controlled the narrative. Hours passed with argument and tension, but my position was unwavering. By the end, both Vivian and Nate had nothing left to offer. Their defenses dismantled, I leaned back, letting the weight of the confrontation settle, knowing that the resolution wasn't about punishment. It was about defining my limits, my boundaries, and my life moving forward. The next morning brought clarity, a final reckoning that would solidify the consequences of their choices. Weeks passed, and the storm that had consumed my life slowly began to settle. I spent mornings in quiet reflection, afternoons tackling projects I had set aside for years, and evenings reconnecting with friends who had supported me from the beginning. Each day felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself, a deliberate act of rebuilding the life that Vivian and Nate had tried to manipulate. The apartment I moved into felt like a sanctuary, modest, but entirely mine. I arranged the furniture, placed books and photographs, and watched the sunlight move across the floor in the late afternoon, grounding me in the reality I had chosen for myself. I no longer measured happiness by approval from others or the presence of those who had betrayed me. Control over my own decisions became the truest measure of freedom. Ila remained a quiet presence at my side. We spent long evenings talking, laughing, and sharing the small victories of everyday life. The trust that had bound us during the chaos had only deepened, subtle gestures and shared silences forming the foundation of something real. There was no rush, no expectation, only the steady building of a connection rooted in loyalty and understanding. I reflected often on the events of the wedding and the weeks that followed. Betrayal had attempted to destroy me, but courage, intelligence, and strategic action had allowed me not only to survive, but to thrive. I had reclaimed my story, defined my boundaries, and taken ownership of the narrative that mattered most. And as I looked toward the future, I understood that the strength born from this experience was mine alone, unshakable and irrevocable. The lessons learned and the life rebuilt were only the beginning of what I was capable of achieving.